Hi. Someone in class pointed out that the links to Bics and Calp on the language development PowerPoint didn't work. And I realized that, I'm so used to teaching this class face-to-face that um, I needed to elaborate on a really important concept in second language development. And it's derived from the research by Jim Cummins, Cummins, and largely derived from data from Canadian studies of French and English bilingual students in schools in Canada, and then elaborated on by O'Malley and Chameau in America. But the idea is that, well, imagine an iceberg, and you know that an iceberg, sometimes we talk about the tip of an iceberg, and I'm trying to figure out some way to show you this as well as speak to you about it, but at least this is a start. If you imagine the tip of an iceberg, the iceberg tip shows above the water line. So think of an iceberg as though you could see through the water, and there would be the bulk of the biggest part of the iceberg is underneath the water, and the tip of the iceberg is just a small part of what is actually showing and visible to our human eye. Well, that's what Cummins and Chameau and O'Malley talk about when they talk about Bics and Calp, that cognitive academic language proficiency, which is also abbreviated as CALP, is the tip of the iceberg, where the larger portion of language development is built upon the foundation of the largest part of the iceberg, which is Bics, basic interpersonal communication skills. Remember, there are 4 elements of language: speaking, listening, reading, and writing. Basically, Bics is speaking and listening, and there's a whole plethora of activities and years of experience with language that is involved in the accumulation of Bics skills, basic interpersonal communication skills. Hi, how you doing? Where you going? What are you doing? Those sorts of things that are speaking and listening skills. What schools require us to do most often is cognitive academic language, which is the reading and writing component, which is very much more sophisticated. So what these researchers have stated, and it's been substantiated by a whole number of researchers in bilingual education, and is that while a second language learner, particularly a second language learner, may have a rich store of basic interpersonal communication skills, there may not be the language structures available to them to perform as easily in the cognitive academic language proficiency skills, which is what we require them to do in schools. It's just like when you have a baby. They can understand much more than they can speak. I remember my youngest in particular, my youngest daughter, I would say, go get your coat, go get your ball, go get your this, go get your that. And she understood everything. She just couldn't speak. And it was 2 years and 3 months, 3 weeks before she really said much more than mommy and daddy and pointed at things. But the really remarkable thing was when she finally did speak, her first complete sentence was, "Look, the water is turquoise," out in our boat. So that was pretty exciting. Just happy memories. At any rate, When you exit second language learners out of ESOL, because of their ability to speak, typically, if you look at the assessments that are used to exit students out of ESOL, you know there are 5 levels of ESOL based on the SOLM, typically with one being minimal or none, actually 0. Most of these measurements that exit students out of ESOL are measures of speaking and listening skills, receptive language skills. And what Chameau and O'Malley have stated is that, and Cummins as well, is that before we exit these students out of ESOL, because they can speak a language fairly well, let's take a look at their cognitive academic piece. Can they read and write in the language? And typically, the stage theorists say it takes about 2 years for a second language learner to become proficient, relatively proficient in Bics, basic interpersonal communication skills, speaking and listening. I know when I lived in Mexico for a year, I taught school, and I taught English as a second language actually in Mexico. I felt like I was normalized and enculturated when I started dreaming in Spanish. But it took a long time. It was almost a year of speaking and hearing the language almost exclusively before I really became comfortable reading the newspaper and writing a letter or writing on the board for my students in whole sentences or essays or whatever in Spanish. So it's the same idea. I think their main point is, the researchers' main point is we're exiting these kids out way too early from the services that they need to be successful. And the problem with that is, of course, we see dropouts, we see frustration, we see prison populations. It just goes on and on and on. So, to the extent that a district can maintain the student in ESOL services, and that in order to ensure that both the tip of the iceberg as well as the foundation are built strong, then those students tend to be more successful. Now, just, a little issue with the research model, because Cummins said, it takes about 5 to 7 years for full Calp to develop in these French Canadian school-age students who are bilingual in terms of both languages, being fully literate in both languages. And guess what? Canadian populations are very, very different from our populations of second language learners. First of all, you're dealing with one language. Secondly, they're a much more homogeneous population, and they tend not to be low SES in those bilingual schools. So if it takes 5 to 7 years for our Canadian school-age children to learn a second language to proficiency, you have to think about, well, what does that mean for us when we're talking about remediating, or not remediating, it's not the right word, but working with students who come from low socioeconomic status homes and background experience deficits and all sorts of things. I suspect it probably would take longer still. So that's a good area for research if any of you are interested. I think Juan is going to be dealing with that in his semester project. So hope this helps. Thanks.